The sky was an unsettling shade of violet, the distant stars flickering like embers in a fading fire. Jack Blackwood sat hunched over the control panel of his small spacecraft, fingers tapping nervously against the cold metal. The hum of the engine was oddly soothing, but it couldn't quell the knot in his stomach. In just hours, the entire fate of humanity would rest on his shoulders. He wasn't supposed to be here, but here he was, deep in enemy space, facing a war he never asked for. Approaching the coordinates, the voice of his co-pilot, Vasra, broke his thoughts, her tone as calm as ever. "You ready for this, Jack?" He glanced over at her. She was focused, her glowing alien eyes scanning the monitors, an expression of calm determination on her sharp features. Vasra was one of the few who believed humanity had a fighting chance against the Galactic Council, the ancient and powerful beings who ruled the stars. She was, in many ways, humanity's only hope. Jack wasn't so sure. He had been thrust into this role as Earth's representative after the Council's sudden attack. One moment, he was a low-ranking strategist, and the next, he was negotiating survival with aliens who saw humans as nothing more than pests. The Council had underestimated humanity's will, but now, they were seeing the consequences. He pushed the thought aside. "Just tell me what I need to do." The tension was palpable as the ship drifted into the orbit of the Council's homeworld. The atmosphere inside was thick with anticipation, the kind that came before a battle, the kind Jack had felt countless times in the military. But this wasn't a typical mission. This was humanity's last stand. Vasra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Stay close to me. If we don't convince them to call off the invasion, we're done. Humanity's done." Jack clenched his jaw. He wouldn't let that happen. Not on his watch. "We'll make them listen," he said, more to himself than to her. The large, metallic world of the Council loomed in front of them, a monolithic structure that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. For all its majesty, the city felt hollow, barren of the warmth and life Jack had known on Earth. There was something unsettling about the place, a heaviness in the air that even Vasra, who had spent years within the Council's corridors, couldn't shake. The ship landed with a soft thud, the engines powering down. Jack stood up, adjusting his uniform, readying himself for the meeting ahead. Vasra followed his lead, though there was a slight hesitation in her movement. She had once been part of the Council's elite, an ambassador of sorts, but that was before she realized the Council wasn't interested in diplomacy. They were conquerors. And humanity was their next target. "We're entering the lion's den," Jack muttered under his breath. "You think I don't know that?" Vasra's voice was sharp, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. The doors to the ship opened, and they stepped onto the cold metal surface of the Council's landing bay. The air was thin here, and Jack could feel the weight of every step. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their boots echoing against the empty hall. Ahead of them, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, imposing, and draped in the robes of the Council, the figure moved with purpose, his face hidden beneath a hood. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The leader of the Council himself, the one who had given the orders to destroy Earth. "You've arrived, human," the figure's voice was deep, reverberating through the empty hall. "I assume you understand the consequences of your actions." Jack squared his shoulders, meeting the figure's gaze with all the resolve he could muster. "I'm here to stop this war," he said, his voice steady. "We're not going down without a fight." Vasra stepped forward, her eyes flashing with defiance. "Humanity doesn't need to be destroyed. You've miscalculated." The Council leader chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Miscalculated? We've watched you for centuries. You are nothing. You've always been nothing." But now, his eyes flicked to Vasra, then back to Jack. "Now you have a voice. And we will make sure it's silenced." Jack's grip tightened on the edge of his uniform. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. This was it, the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. "Tell me," the Council leader continued, his voice dripping with disdain, "do you honestly believe you stand a chance?" The words struck like a punch, but Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step forward, eyes locked with the leader's. "We may not have the power you do, but we have something you'll never understand. We have the will to survive. And that's something you can't break." The silence that followed was heavy, the weight of the council leader's gaze pressing down on them. Jack didn't know if he was ready for what came next, but there was no turning back. Humanity's fate rested in his hands. "We'll see about that," the council leader murmured, before signaling to his guards. The fight for Earth was about to begin. The doors to the Grand Council chamber slammed shut behind them, sealing Jack and Vasra inside with an air of finality. Jack's pulse thudded in his ears as he absorbed the vast, intimidating space. The chamber's walls were made of some reflective black stone, polished to a mirror-like sheen, and the floor was a cold, smooth surface that stretched endlessly beneath their feet. He could feel his breath catch in his throat, a mix of awe and fear tightening around his chest. This was it, the heart of the galactic empire that had overlooked humanity for centuries. Vasra moved ahead of him, her pace deliberate. She didn't flinch under the council leader's gaze, nor did she seem to acknowledge the silence that stretched out before them. She had once been a key player in this political game, but now, she was on the opposite side. Jack tried not to let his nerves show. He had been thrust into this position by circumstance, but he wasn't about to let fear dictate his actions. Not when the stakes were this high. Ahead of them stood the leader of the council, a towering figure shrouded in flowing robes, his hands folded behind his back. His skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, an unnatural hue that marked him as one of the ancient rulers of the galaxy. The air hummed with the energy emanating from his presence. Despite the weight of his authority, the council leader's eyes betrayed a hint of amusement as he regarded them. "You've come to beg, then?" His voice was a low, almost mocking rumble, but it carried a depth that made the hairs on the back of Jack's neck rise. "Beg for your lives?" Jack's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. He'd heard rumors about the council's arrogance, but hearing it firsthand, feeling its oppressive force, was another matter entirely. He glanced at Vasra, who was standing stoically beside him, her face unreadable. "We're here to make sure Earth survives," Jack responded, his voice steady but firm. "You'll find that humans are more resilient than you give us credit for." The leader's laugh was soft but cutting, a sound that chilled Jack to his core. "Resilience?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. "Tell me, human. When you are crushed beneath the weight of your own insignificance, what will your resilience do for you?" Jack swallowed hard but stood tall. "It's not about what you think you know about us. We've survived worse. And we won't just fade into the background like you expect." The council leader's smile widened, his eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. "Ah, but that's exactly the point. You are nothing compared to the power of the council. You think you stand a chance because of your so-called resilience? It is laughable." Vasra stepped forward then, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "Humanity isn't some plaything for you to discard. You've underestimated them, and it will be your downfall." The leader's gaze shifted to her, icy and calculating. "You speak as though you have some special insight into their nature. You were once one of us, Vasra. What's changed?" His tone was laced with scorn, but there was an underlying curiosity, as if he had already made the decision to dispose of her the moment she had betrayed the council. Vasra stood tall, unflinching. "I've seen what they're capable of. And that's why you'll lose." The leader chuckled softly, an almost patronizing sound. "We will see, won't we?" A sudden, sharp alarm rang through the chamber, piercing the tension like a knife. Jack's heart skipped a beat as the lights flickered, and the once silent room was filled with the frantic hum of systems coming to life. The council leader's expression flickered briefly with a hint of alarm, but he quickly masked it. "What's going on?" Jack asked, his voice demanding. The leader's gaze shifted back to the screen in front of him, where flashing red lights indicated a breach in the outer perimeter. "A small anomaly. Nothing to worry about," he said, but there was an edge to his voice now, the first sign of unease he'd shown. Vasra's eyes narrowed, and she leaned closer to Jack, whispering. "They're not the only ones who've been watching. Before Jack could respond, the leader's voice cut through the air again. "You dare sabotage us?" He sneered, but there was a weariness in his posture now. "Your arrogance will be your undoing." Jack clenched his fists, barely holding himself in check. He couldn't show weakness now, not with everything on the line. "We're not the ones making the first move." The leader turned back to the screen, his eyes narrowing as a shadow passed over his face. The image on the screen showed a small fleet of ships moving swiftly towards the Council's flagship. They were unmistakably human ships, small but powerful, and apparently equipped with the same kind of ingenuity that had allowed humanity to survive. "You have no idea what you've started," the Council leader growled. "This is your final warning. Surrender now, or face extinction." Vasra's voice was low but laced with a grim certainty. "Humanity doesn't surrender." As the tension in the room mounted, Jack knew the first shots of this war had already been fired. And no matter what the Council leader said, there was no turning back now. The Council's flagship trembled beneath the sudden impact of distant explosions. The room vibrated with the tremors, but the Council leader remained impassive, his expression as cold as ever. Jack could see the faint flicker of worry in his eyes, a crack in the veneer of invulnerability that had always surrounded the Council. But it was Vasra's reaction that caught Jack's attention. She was no longer the calm, composed diplomat he had once known. Her stance had shifted, her posture rigid, and the faintest hint of something resembling fear flashed across her face. "We've underestimated them," she whispered under her breath, as if speaking more to herself than to Jack. Jack turned his gaze to the screen, where chaos had erupted outside the Council flagship. Humanity's makeshift fleet, though vastly outnumbered, was holding its ground with a tenacity that even the most seasoned warriors would envy. These were no elite soldiers. They were civilians, farmers, engineers, teachers, people who had been forced to defend their homes. And yet, they fought like lions, driven by a singular, undeniable force, the will to survive. "Their tactics are unconventional," Jack muttered, eyes scanning the battlefield. The human ships darted and wove through the barrage of fire like swarming insects, evading the Council's precision weapons with sheer unpredictability. They didn't have the advanced technology or firepower to match the Council's elite fleets, but they had something far more dangerous, a resourcefulness born from desperation. The Council leader's voice sliced through the air, cutting into Jack's thoughts. "This will not end well for your people. You cannot win against the might of the Council." Jack looked up at him, the words heavy in his chest. "We're not trying to win. We're trying to survive." The leader's lips curled into a sneer, but Jack saw a flicker of doubt pass over his face, an emotion he was clearly unused to showing. "Survival is meaningless without purpose. You humans are nothing more than a fleeting distraction." Vasra's eyes flashed, and she took a step forward. "You don't understand. Humanity's greatest strength isn't in its technology. It's in its capacity to adapt, to change when the odds are stacked against it. You think you can crush us easily. But you're wrong." The leader's smile widened, but there was a sharpness to it now, something dangerous. "You still cling to this fantasy. How many more of your ships will you send to die before you accept the inevitable?" Jack's fists clenched at his sides, and he took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "The more we lose, the harder we fight. You'll never break us." The Council leader's eyes narrowed, and Jack saw the first true signs of concern. He didn't speak, but his hand hovered over a console, signaling to his officers. The tension in the room thickened, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Vasra turned to Jack, her expression hard. "We don't have much time. They're preparing for a full-scale bombardment. If we don't do something soon, we won't just lose ships, we'll lose everything." Jack nodded grimly. The countdown had begun, and he knew there was only one option left. They had to strike at the Council's heart. If they could destabilize the Council's leadership, maybe, just maybe, the rest of the galaxy would see humanity's potential and step in to stop the destruction. "We need to get to the Central Command Center," Jack said, his voice steady with resolve. "It's time to show them what humanity is capable of." Vasra's expression softened for the briefest moment. "Are you sure about this?" Jack looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "We don't have a choice." Without another word, they moved as one, stepping toward the massive doors of the council chamber. Outside, the sound of chaos reverberated through the ship, the distant clang of weapons and the hum of energy blasts filling the air. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and Jack could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. They navigated the cold, sterile corridors of the flagship with determination, avoiding guards and security checkpoints with a mixture of stealth and speed. As they approached the central command center, Jack's mind raced. This was their last chance to end the conflict before the Council's final weapon could be deployed. Vasra paused at the door, her hand hovering over the console. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." Jack met her gaze. There never was. The door hissed open, and they stepped into the heart of the Council's operations. The room was vast, its walls lined with rows of glowing consoles, each monitoring the various sectors of the galaxy. At the center of the room, a massive holographic display projected the Council's fleets and assets, with bright red markings indicating the impending attack on Earth. "We need to disrupt their command structure," Jack said, his voice grim but resolute. "If we can cripple their fleet communications, they'll be blind." Vasra nodded, already moving toward the central control panel. As she worked, Jack kept watch, his mind churning with thoughts of what came next. He knew this was their final opportunity. If they failed, humanity would be no more than a footnote in the galaxy's history. And then the alarms began to blare. The council leader's voice crackled through the intercom, cold and furious. "You think you can stop us? You will regret this." Jack's heart raced. The countdown had begun, and there was no turning back now. The battle for Earth had entered its final phase. The entire ship quaked beneath the sudden surge of energy. The alarms screamed in unison, their shrill wail clawing at Jack's nerves. Sweat dripped down his neck as the door to the central command room slammed shut behind him. The Council's fortress, once an imposing symbol of absolute power, now felt like a crumbling monument to arrogance. "We don't have much time," Vasra said, her voice tight with urgency. She was already at the control panel, her fingers flying across the interface with practiced precision. "They've activated their final weapon. If we don't disable their systems now, Earth will be reduced to ash." Jack's heart raced as he scanned the room, his gaze flickering over the holographic displays. The glowing map of Earth's position was flashing red, signaling the imminent launch of the Council's ultimate strike, an energy cannon powerful enough to wipe entire continents from existence. He couldn't let that happen. "They'll know we're here any second," Jack said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "We need to move faster." Vasra shot him a grim look, her fingers pausing for a fraction of a second. "I'm working as fast as I can. The Council's security is tight, but I can override their systems. It's just going to take a little more time." Jack glanced back at the door. He could hear the sound of footsteps echoing in the corridor beyond, and the metallic clang of heavy boots drawing closer. The Council's elite guards were already on their way. "Just a little more time," Jack repeated, a steely edge in his voice. "We've got this." The sound of the approaching soldiers grew louder, and Jack could almost feel the heat of their footsteps closing in. He turned to face the door, instinctively shifting into a defensive stance. His body was taut, every muscle coiled with the anticipation of what was to come. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore, he was fighting for everything humanity had built, everything they stood for. The future of Earth rested on the fragile shoulders of this moment. "We can't let them stop us," he muttered, his eyes locked on the door. Vasra didn't respond, her concentration absolute. The light from the control panels flickered as she hacked through the Council's encrypted systems, her fingers dancing across the console. Every passing second felt like a lifetime. Suddenly, the door exploded open with a deafening crash. A group of council guards poured into the room, weapons raised and their eyes cold with fury. Jack's instincts kicked in immediately. He lunged forward, grabbing the nearest guard by the arm and twisting it behind his back with a force that left the soldier gasping for breath. The others hesitated for just a moment, surprised by Jack's speed and strength. Vasra didn't waste a second. As Jack incapacitated one guard, she moved with lethal precision, neutralizing another with a single, swift strike to the neck. The remaining soldiers took a step back, their expressions flickering with uncertainty. They hadn't anticipated this level of resistance. They hadn't anticipated humanity. "We're not backing down," Jack said, his voice dripping with defiance. He stood tall, every inch of him radiating confidence. "Not this time." The guards hesitated again, unsure how to proceed. The council had underestimated humanity's resilience, its capacity to fight for its survival. They thought they were dealing with fragile beings, easily crushed beneath the weight of their own insignificance. But they hadn't counted on this, the unyielding spirit of a species that would rather die on its feet than live on its knees. Vasra turned back to the control panel, her fingers moving with renewed urgency. "I'm almost there," she said, her voice strained but determined. "Just a few more seconds." Jack took a deep breath, focusing all his energy on the task at hand. The guards were still there, circling like vultures, but they hadn't made their move yet. Maybe, just maybe, they were beginning to realize that this wasn't a fight they could win. That humanity wasn't something to be crushed or dismissed. "Now," Vasra hissed. Her fingers slammed down on the final key, and the holographic display flickered once before going dark. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then, the floor trembled beneath their feet as the power to the council's weapon systems flickered and shut down. The hum of the energy cannon, once building to a deafening crescendo, faded into nothingness. The impending destruction of Earth was halted. Jack's chest heaved with relief, but there was no time to savor it. The guards, sensing the change in the atmosphere, lunged forward, weapons raised. Jack spun around, his movements a blur of instinct and adrenaline. He dodged the first strike, disarming the guard with a swift twist of his wrist. His heart was pounding, but his focus was unshakable. Vasra was by his side, her expression a mask of fierce determination. "We've won this round," she said, a small, satisfied smile flickering across her face. "But this isn't over." Jack nodded, turning back to the door. The council was far from defeated. But humanity had proven something undeniable today: they weren't going down without a fight. Not now, not ever. The future of Earth was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Jack believed they had a chance. The battle was far from over, but humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer in question.